Have you ever seen a dead body? What's the story? Not safe for work? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My dad died of a massive heart attack when I was 14. I made the call to 911 while my older sister attempted CPR. It was like 2 a.m. and my mom was in shock. I know I saw him, but I don't remember much. There were crisis counselors, unsure of their official term, who showed up not long after the EMTs to comfort me and my siblings. They explicitly told us not to look into the room he was in, but I did it anyway. The only memories I have of his appearance after he passed are how purple his face was and the shape of the body bag they put him in. I know I saw more than that, but trauma is funny that way. Longest night of my life. I rolled my roommate over. He was lying face down on his floor, half naked. I knew instantly that he was gone. There was just such an unnatural look to his face. It's been 3 years, and I won't forget it. When I was 11, I lived alone with my dad because him and my mom had gotten a divorce about 6 years back. He had diabetes and was seizure prone. One day I was riding my bike home from school, opened the front door, and saw him sitting on the couch with his head back. Being a kid, I didn't think too much of it, and I thought he was asleep. I picked up a pillow and tossed it to him and said, "Hey, I'm home," but he didn't say anything or react. That's when I froze. I looked closer and saw blood running down his chin from his mouth. I guess he had had a seizure while I was at school, bit off his tongue, and drowned in his own blood. Only dead body I've seen outside of a funeral. I have seen a few, but the one that stuck with me was when I was in the US Air Force in Bosnia. I was in a caravan of black Chevy Suburbans, and I see this body in a river, caught on some tree branch. The body was just moving with the current, but tugging at the branch with the head underwater. It made me panic, and I told everyone in the vehicle, "There's a body in the river," and no one cared. I was trick-or-treating as a child. Person didn't answer doorbell, so I peeped through his window. He was lying face down on the kitchen floor. Called the police, and they busted the door down right in front of me. He was dead for a few days before I found him. Firefighter here. My first dead body on the job was a guy who committed suicide in the woods. My shift was searching for him when he left a goodbye note. Then, call it fate, 2 years after his disappearance, a neighbor found him, and my shift was going to collect the remains and put it in the bag. You would think that after 2 years there would be only bones left, but his legs and some of his stomach was still in decomposing state, and the worst thing was the smell. I believe now when they say that a decomposing body is the worst smell ever, so somehow we collected him and gave the remains to his family to bury him properly. Old security guard guy named John used to rent our upstairs. Nice guy, kept a lot of soda around and would always keep a few around for his kids. John usually worked nights, so it was not unusual for us to not cross paths or see him a lot as he slept during the day. One day, a cop shows up at the house and I answered the door not knowing what I did. Turns out he was there because John hadn't come in or contacted the security company he works for in a week. Asked if he could go upstairs and check to see if John was there. So my mom, the cop, and I go up to his room, open the door, and all I remember was seeing a blue arm hanging off the bed before I bolted. Guess he had died in his sleep. He was old and a widower, and was kind of at that point where he just wanted to see his wife again, so it was sad, but he died naturally. Watched a man have a heart attack at 45 miles per hour while driving his truck down a crowded city street, just past some junior high school kids. His last act in his life was to turn across 3 lanes of traffic, jump an empty sidewalk, and plant his truck head-on into a concrete barrier. By doing so, he probably ensured his own death in the accident, but undoubtedly saved lives. I was too far away to assist, but I watched while strangers pulled him out and tried CPR. Then the medics arrived, took over, and got him out of there. The damage from the accident, plus the heart attack, meant he was dead before they got him out of the truck, so this barely counts. Also, had his truck gone the other way, he would have hit me instead of the barrier. Hero. I'm sure a bunch of Redditors have been to a viewing or wake, but I watched a coworker die in front of me of a massive coronary. We got back on the job site after lunch, and about an hour later, he was complaining of a stomachache, and we were all giving him shit because he'd eaten a bunch of shellfish from a buffet. He left to get some antacids or Pepto-Bismol or something and came back. Then about 30 minutes later, his body locked up and he hit the floor. Another coworker started chest compressions, but we found out later he was pretty much dead before he hit the floor. He was barely 50 if I recall correctly, but he ate like shit and had a coke habit. My father, my brother, and my first husband, all gone now, and I was there when they each died from heart attack, cancer, and heart attack, respectively. I'm really not that old either, but it sure brings you to your own mortality to experience your closest loved ones in the process of leaving too soon. I was pretty young, 7 to 8 years old, and heard a loud noise in my friend's garage. He was playing NES, so I went to go see what it was, and I found his dad, whom had shot himself. I didn't know what to do. It was pretty overwhelming, so I just left and went home and didn't tell my parents or anything because I thought for some reason I was going to get in trouble. Also in my teens, I was sitting in the backseat of my mom's car, stopped at a red light on the way to school, when a motorcycle going way too fast clipped a car, and the driver hit a chain link fence and slid along it at high speed. That guy wound up dying, and it was a pretty intense visual. It was on my side of the car. I saw it happening and threw my jacket over my little brother's head so he didn't see it. More than I can count. EMS and fire service before working as an ed tech, med school, residency, and a couple years of practice. I've seen homicides, suicides, ODs, fire deaths, blunt traumas, penetrating traumas, decompositions, and decompensations, kids and adults. I've intubated and pulled breathing tubes. I've been directly and indirectly responsible for deaths. I've broken that news to families. I take on that risk and responsibility daily. Some stay with me, others do not. The one that I remember most vividly was my first year of residency. We had this biker lady in ICU who had no family, visitors, or next of kin. She had a state-appointed guardian. We'd run out of things we could do and were beyond the point where she'd have any chance at a meaningful recovery. So, it fell to me to get the state guardian to approve withdrawal of care. Once all the calls were made and approval was done, I went in with the nurse who helped me shut down the vent. I saw she had a band name tattoo, so I pulled up Spotify and played their top songs, pulled the tube, and held her hand the next 18 minutes till she ran out of steam and stopped breathing. It's been effing with me lately because I remember how sad it was that she had nobody she knew nearby when she died. It was the only withdrawal of care I had to do like that, till COVID. Whenever I was 13, I stayed with my grandmother, who lived alone and was only 51 during spring break. I woke up in the middle of the night to her sitting in the living room where I was sleeping on the couch. She was sitting there awake with her Pekingese. I asked her why she was up. She responded, "I can't sleep, and hearing you and Ginger, the dog, sleep relaxes me. Go back to sleep." I ended up going back to sleep. Woke up the next morning and found her passed away on her bedroom floor. My dad fell off the roof and broke his neck. By the time I got to the hospital, he was clearly brain dead. We had to pull the plug. I'd never seen someone die before. It's crazy to see the near instantaneous change in color and texture of the skin when someone's heart stops. It was traumatic at the time, but enough time has passed that I can look back on it objectively now. A homeless man in Paris about 10 years ago. It was February and he had frozen to death overnight on the train station platform. It took 5 men to lift the body onto the gurney. I saw the same thing in Ottawa a few years later, 6 a.m. outside the Rideau Center, and a man had apparently taken something and passed out outside the bus terminal, only to be found as an ice block the next morning. It was all very surreal. It had to have been pushing minus 30 degrees Celsius with wind chill, and yet this guy just froze outside a damn mall in the heart of the city. Like, his eyes were still open, and I saw frost on them. Twice, both due to car accidents, both within the same year. The first was while I was on my way to the Toronto airport to pick up my parents. The 401 from Kitchener was stupid as usual, so I followed Google's advice to take side roads and turned at an intersection only immediately to see a cyclist sprawled on the road in a pool of blood, surrounded by cops who weren't tending to him. He'd been hit by a transport truck and died instantly. Wish I'd stayed on the 401. Second time was a few months later. I was living in Atlanta for a practicum and was driving to work at 6:30 a.m. on their very busy ring road. A large something suddenly appeared in my lane, and although I swerved the best I could, I wound up partially running over it. I couldn't tell what it was because it was so mangled even before I hit it, but I thought maybe it was a deer. No, it was a person who'd been inexplicably wandering on the highway and got hit by something like 3 semi-trailers in a row right before I got there. A couple of months ago, I was driving home from work and saw a big plume of smoke ahead. Pulled even with where it was and saw a truck on its side with the driver pulling himself up on the door and a motorcycle on the ground. There was a fire on the ground, bumper from the truck I assumed, and nobody putting it out. Bystanders had rushed to help, no fire or rescue on scene yet. It finally clicked that it wasn't a bumper on fire, it was a body. The motorcyclist was dead on the ground, his head was on fire and his arms were raised up as if he was still holding the handlebars. Horrific. I still can't get over it. He slammed into the truck hard enough to tip it. F. Me and my family were staying at a campsite when me and my dad hear screaming for anyone to come help. Apparently another family staying in the campground was riding ATVs when the husband's ATV had flipped over and they needed someone to help save him because he was trapped. Me and my dad raced to the truck and followed the directions provided down a very rough dirt path to find the husband crushed under this ATV with his neck brutally twisted. Before heading out to rescue him, the mom and daughter mentioned that he was communicating under the ATV, so finding him deceased was far from expected. After lifting off the ATV, we went to the road to flag down first responders so they would be able to locate the trail. The mom and daughter drove by in tears a few minutes after we flagged down the first responders. They stopped and asked us what hospital he was being brought to so they could meet him there. Telling the family the hospital name without sharing what we have uncovered was hard. Imagining what getting to the hospital would entail, I still feel bad for the family's loss to this day. In my late teens or early 20s, my best friend and I were hopelessly addicted to heroin. Eventually, I kicked it and got clean while he continued to use. One day, I had convinced him to come to an NA meeting with me. From the time I got off the phone with him to the time I got to his house, about 10 minutes had passed. During the daytime, he usually left his front door unlocked, especially if he knew I was coming by, and I just walked in. I found him on the couch, dead by overdose. I called 911. I tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Usually in heroin ODs, the death is caused by the slowing and halt of breathing. I tried CPR, I tried it all. Even looked around for his kit for a Suboxone to see if putting it under his tongue might bring him back due to the naloxone, but it was all in vain. He must have taken a shot immediately after hanging up the phone with me and died a minute or two later. I feel like part of me died that day. It's been about 10 years, and I still have dreams occasionally where we're just hanging out and having fun, and I wake up just to realize he's still gone. Rough stuff. My parents, younger brother, and I were on our way home from visiting my grandma. We were on a highway that used to be called Bloody 29 before it was expanded due to the amount of bad accidents. It was night, and I was playing my Game Boy when we suddenly slow down. As we get a little further down the road, my mom starts yelling at us not to look out the window. Of course I do. As we pass the scene of a really bad accident that must have just happened, I see a badly mangled, bloody body without a head laying in the road. I'll never get that image out of my mind 26 years later. I felt different after that. Don't really know how to explain how, but it kind of messed me up.